Hi, everyone, and welcome to the fourth episode of Florida Wildlife Advocates. Today, we have a very special guest with us, somebody who I've wanted to talk to on here since this podcast began. And that's Stel Bailey, the renowned clean water activist who has such a broad range of knowledge that she's been called up to Washington to testify and to talk to our legislators. And before that, we're going to say, hi, Stel.
Hi. Hi.
How are you?
I'm doing good, and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you as well. Before we get into the details and the science of what you've been studying, I'd like to go a little bit into your background. And for that, we're going to go to our first story, and hopefully this kick.
The battle against cancer, now she's fighting the war against cancer causing chemicals in the water. And based on what's happened to her family, she thinks these chemicals have been here for a while.
Officials at Cocoa Beach are asking Florida Fish and Wildlife to test the fish in its waterways to see if it's safe to eat. The community first brought up the question after tests reveal high levels of cancer-causing agents in the city's well.
Bailey is a survivor of Hodgkin's lymphoma. She's thrilled that the report is out after calling for an investigation for years. In 2013, 4 loved ones and the family dog were diagnosed with cancer. Disease and death have become a part of her life. Residents and some experts believe that cancer is coming from chemicals and munitions from Patrick Air Force Base.
Advocate for these communities that are dying and getting cancer and getting sick from contaminants.
Patrick Air Force Base, I want to mention, has had PFAS levels detected at 4,338,000 parts per trillion. By way of comparison, my colleagues, the risk level found by CDC's Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry is 11 parts per trillion for PFOA, and for PFOS it is 7 parts per trillion. 7. That's when you start seeing real health risks, when it's higher than that.
Her brother diagnosed with cancer, then her father. Still now fighting for him, her family, and the others now coming forward with rare forms of cancer.
My family story, I want it to be looked at as a way of uniting everybody and making a change.
So, Stel, it's such a compelling video. I must say I started tearing up when I was watching that the first time. A lot of people get cancer. They have relatives that get cancer, and they become activists for cancer research and things like that. The thing that I find so unique about you is that you went in behind the problem and started looking for the cause of the cancer instead of dealing with the effect, which is cancer. And that, in and of itself, I think puts you in a very special category. And then beyond that, you went into the science behind the causes. So could you kind of give us an idea of your journey thus far?
Yeah, so the whole reason why that happened, it was because I had a really excellent doctor who put it in my medical records that our cancer was likely environmentally caused. She recognized right off in the beginning when she was looking into my case, and I told her that my father was diagnosed, my uncle was diagnosed, our dog had just passed away from cancer. That stood out to her, and if we need more doctors like her, because if we were looking at the root cause of cancer, we could prevent a lot more cancer. And so that's where it all really began for me. And I vowed from that moment forward, I'm going to knock on doors. If I beat this thing, if I beat cancer, I'm going to be knocking on every single door in the areas that I grew up in Brevard County. And I'm going to start collecting data on who has cancer, who doesn't have cancer. And that unfolded basically a nightmare for me, because when I started doing that, fast forward after my remission, I didn't think I was going to get as many cases as I did. I thought maybe I'd find 20 people like on the same street. It went up to 800 people. Then it started getting bigger and bigger, and there were hot spots throughout Brevard County, and one of those hot spots was Satellite Beach. And so that's how I ended up in Satellite Beach. I didn't grow up there, but I ended up there because of the data that I was collecting, and I collaborated with an oncologist, and then we found these chemicals called PFAS chemicals, which, of course, the Department of Defense, the military bases that we live around, use this in their firefighting foam. And what they used to do is they would just wash it directly into the waters, and then it impacted all the wells, the groundwater, in the areas that they washed all this firefighting foam down into. And so a lot of people, as you know, many decades ago, we drank from our wells. We drank directly from our hose. So you hear this saying where everybody's like, I drank from the hose my whole life and I'm fine. How do you know you're fine? Because how many people are actually getting their doctor checkups? How many people are getting their PET scans and their CAT scans and their blood work done? How do you really know that it hasn't impacted you? I've had my blood tested for PFAS chemicals. A lot of people don't know that, and they were astronomically high, just like the test results from the wells were astronomically high in Brevard County.
So you're kind of like a private investigator, right? Your doctor said this is environmentally caused. She didn't say what caused it. She just said it's environmentally caused. And then you started looking for relationships between cancer cases and locality. And plotting those out, you said, okay, there are these hot spots, as you say, in Brevard County, and what do these things have in common? Now, I don't think many people realize, and certainly I'm sure the realtors in those areas are not alerting people to the presence of these PFAS in the water supply. But you were talking about wells, but does this also affect the tap water in Brevard?
Yes, it does. You got to think, like for instance, the city of Titusville, they draw their water from wells, which is groundwater. They also buy their water from Cocoa. So it really, you have to look and, like you said, you have to do deep research to figure out, well, where is my drinking water sourced? A lot of people don't even know where their drinking water comes from. Is it being sourced from a lake? Is it being sourced from your aquifer, your wells? Is it being sourced, are you buying it from another city? A lot of people don't know the answers to those questions. And so you're right, that's always been within me. I've always done journalism since I was at a very young age. My mother was a photographer, and so I was able to learn at a very young age how to do investigative research work. And so that led me into where I'm at today, is being able to look into, like you said, I did a lot of archived newspapers, and I went through all of those to see if there was any historical documentation of water pollution, which there was. So now I've created a timeline. I create a lot of timelines on a lot of my work. And so that takes you, you would be amazed at what timelines can do.
Well, let me ask you this, because, over here where we're broadcasting from Orlando, we have former military bases and things like that. I think McCoy Air Force Base. Is this something, are these chemicals that were used while McCoy was in operation?
It's very likely. And anyone who lives near a former military base or around an active installation should be doing some research and looking into any legacy contamination that they use. Perfect example, Camp Lejeune. I tell people they're surprised to learn that we have a lot of very similar contaminants as Camp Lejeune, like TCE. We have extremely high levels because of NASA, and they've found it at water plants in our area. So we have three military bases. Camp Lejeune is just one, and look at the impact it had on all of those soldiers. So really put that in perspective.
Yeah, I mean, these Air Force bases, just speaking from a Florida-centric viewpoint, we have so many Air Force bases in Florida. We have, and I don't know if, for instance, commercial airports, did they use the same chemical or, yeah?
Yes.
So even commercial airports. And, you know, our aquifer runs underneath all of us, and it's not really segmented too well. I mean, there is a South Florida aquifer, but for the most part, we're all drinking from this upper Florida aquifer. And it's not very deep, so it doesn't really take long for these chemicals to get down there. And certainly if you're drinking tap water that's coming through a municipal well that's tapped into that same aquifer, it's just a matter of time. I'm really astounded at the, number one, the research that you've done. And the other part of it is, why is no one else, why are we not hearing about this? You know, from not even network news, I mean local news, you know, why are they not zeroing in on this? Because we have so many cancer cases in Florida, and I guess, you know, we have an aging population, right? We have an average age of 44, and people get cancer, and they're like, oh, he's got cancer.
We factored that in.
Yeah.
In our research, we made sure that we only did children up to the age of 30.
So where else are they going to get it, right?
It's indisputable. It's indisputable. You can't use the aging population in our case where we collected that information. So whenever, to me, there's a lot of distraction methods, and that's one of them. That's a look over here, not over here. And that's used quite often by government. And so when you say, like, why isn't this being talked a lot? I think it's because they don't want to talk about it. They're afraid, they're more worried about property values than they are about human health. And I think it has a lot to do with money and fear that, you know, lawsuits will come like Camp Lejeune, that there will be some accountability, but also that there will be some financial repercussions. Yeah,
well, that I think seems to be the underlying factor on a lot of these environmental problems. Is what is the financial effect and who is it affecting, right? So you have people with, you know, stage 1, stage 2, stage 3 cancer. If they were to go back on the source and say, look, I lived right next to an Air Force base, it's hard, and I know this from talking to attorneys that handle environmental cases. You know, they like to handle, you know, these private injury attorneys. A Coca-Cola truck runs into the back of a car, right? And a person breaks their neck. It's like, boom, there it is, cause and effect. We know who did this. But in this case, with the PFAS, the effect, even though we know it's real, if you were to try to bring someone to justice, let's say, you know, that's you know, a hard thing to do in the state of Florida. But let's say you were capable of, and you go back and you say, all right, who made the decision to use these chemicals? Who manufactured them? Who applied them? You know, how do you get accountability for something like this?
For me, I never wanted legal accountability for our family. What I wanted to do was to ensure that my neighbors and my community never experienced what we went through. And that's why I was so passionate about finding the source so we could stop the source. And so that's been an ongoing theme for us, stop the source. If you stop the source of pollution, you stop a lot of the other issues that are happening. As far as accountability, for me, it's all in the regulations and the legislators' hands, and they have blood on their hands. My father's death is on their hands because they knew about this. The Department of Defense knew about this since the 70s. They knew it was harming the environment. They knew it was harming health, and they continued to use the firefighting foam. 3M and DuPont that created PFAS chemicals, they knew. They were doing testing on their workers, very similar to radium girls. And they knew that it was causing birth defects and other issues. And it is just a tragedy in this country that there is no accountability. And in fact, these companies typically will go bankrupt and then go form a new thing called Gen X, and a new chemical, and a new chemical. And so really what it comes down to is we've got to get into Washington, D.C., and we've got to upgrade our Safe Drinking Water Act. We've got to get legislation in that tests these chemicals before they're ever mass produced.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly with you there. And we have a story that kind of zeroes in on this PFAS problem and what you've done with it. And so I'd like to go to that story right now.
The cancer cases on chemicals used at Patrick Space Force Base. New at 11, News 6's Troy Campbell shows how University of Florida researchers are zeroing in on the cause.
Our uncle, who's not blood related, was diagnosed with cancer, and then a few months later, our family dog actually got cancer, and then my brother at the age of 21 got cancer. Then I was diagnosed with cancer, and then my father was diagnosed with cancer.
Stel Bailey says back in 2013, at the age of 26, she was diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma while living in Cocoa. Her father would later die of cancer, while her and her brother went into remission. On Thursday evening, alongside the University of Florida, Bailey's organization, Fight for Zero, updated residents on their latest findings. Their study is focused on man-made poisons used in and around Patrick Air Force Base, now known as Patrick Space Force Base. Taking thousands of samples across Florida, researchers say their next step is to determine which levels of the poisons are safe for human exposure.
We learned about these chemicals that were known as forever chemicals and realized that for our children and future generations, we needed to step up and embrace the science and to be able to get these chemicals cleaned up and knowing where they're at.
Researchers say tracking storm runoff into the Indian River Lagoon will help identify which areas contain contaminated soil. An ongoing part of their study is tracking fish consumption for residents who fish in the lagoon. Bailey says the key goal moving forward is to provide the Department of Defense and chemical companies a safety threshold to remove chemicals in order to make the area safe for residents.
The win for us is the community realizing they have the power to make a change, whether that change is getting a filtration system for their drinking water, whether that change is going in and getting some health checkups.
The University of Florida says their study is still ongoing, and the information discussed during the meeting is still not ready to be published. They also say that chemical runoff into the Indian River Lagoon most increases during a tropical storm or a hurricane. In Orange County, Troy Campbell, Getting Results, News 6.
Okay, so we go from the areas around these Air Force bases, and in that it talks about how the runoff, not just infiltrating the ground into the groundwater, but the surface water flowing out to the Indian River Lagoon, took these chemicals off the Air Force Base, let's just say Air Force Base, probably through canals and out into the Indian River Lagoon. So what happens to those PFAS once they enter the lagoon?
They're everywhere. So they get uptaked into the seagrass. If there's none left right now, but they have tested the seagrass and it's in the seagrass. So these chemicals uptake into plants. And then who eats the plants? The manatees. And in fact, the same scientists we're working with to do this study, they actually did find it in manatees, dolphins, and alligators. They did a study on that, and they found it. At the time, it was the highest levels in the country. Just like when we found the DoD report, it showed 4.3 million parts per trillion. And just to give you an example, now it's below 1 parts per trillion in the new standards that we got passed on a national level. So that's how high it was. It was in the millions. And so imagine what it's doing to the wildlife in the Indian River Lagoon. It goes into that water, and then you have the added fact of these hurricanes that come through, right? We're dealing with a lot of flooding. And places like Merritt Island have been seeing more and more flooding throughout the years, probably because the different reasons, the result of, more development, things like that. And so what that does is that moves the chemicals around into your community. The flooding moves all of the contamination that we're seeing in the Indian River Lagoon, and then it's in the fish that we're eating. And so guess who's uptaking that? Us, humans. And so that's how we get more PFAS introduced into our bodies. And so I would never personally eat fish out of the Indian River Lagoon because I've actually dissected them. I've filleted them, dissected them, and Orca's doing a study on them, and they've got some of their preliminary data back. And in that data, it shows that the fish have certain issues like PFAS. And so that's just some of the consequences of allowing massive industries to just mass produce chemicals without knowing if they're harmful or not.
And are they still doing that still?
Well, they're not. They phased out the firefighting foam, but what happens is these industries will go and just make a new chemical. So right now they've made Gen X, for instance. So we've been fighting Gen X on a national level. So yeah, I mean, technically, yeah, industries in general are still doing this because our legislation allows it. It's like permitting pollution in Florida, right? Like our own Environmental Protection Agency is like, here's your permit to pollute.
Yeah.
They literally give you out permits to pollute. And so that's why people are frustrated. That's why you're seeing movements like the right to clean water, because there's people trying to take their power back here in Florida. People know, they're not stupid. They know that they need their natural resources to survive, but they also need it for the tourism industries and to survive financially. And so if we continue to have these insane environmental crises like algal blooms, massive fish kills, unusual mortality events with manatees, red tide events on the West Coast, there goes our reputation as the Sunshine State.
Yeah, and we just witnessed how important fishing is in the fishing industry, especially sports fishing industry in Amendment 2, that the right to fish and hunt, which in every other state is the right to hunt and fish, but because fishing is so big here, they put the fishing out front. That because these are forever chemicals, and as you say, that these chemicals have gotten, these toxins have gotten into the Indian River Lagoon. The fish consume the algae. The people consume the fish. Where does it end? Where does the toxicity end, or does it ever?
It doesn't. It never breaks down. That's why it's been labeled a forever chemical. It never breaks down. This is probably by far one of the worst. I mean, you've had DDT, you've had all these other chemicals, but the reason why this is so bad on a global scale is because it doesn't break down. It takes 8 years for the little bit of exposure you have in your body for it to ever even be able to leave your body. So like right now, I did another blood test recently, and my levels are still very high, which means my health risks are high still, because PFAS it's a forever chemical. And I don't think people understand the severity of that, especially with it being a cancer-causing chemical and it being in the environment, not just the water, but it's in the soil and it's in your food supply. It's in deer. These are things that people are using to survive. And so everyone should care about this.
It's interesting. When the right to fish and hunt was going through the Florida legislature, it went through as a House joint resolution. And it went through a couple committees where it should have gone through 3 in the House, and it went through one committee in the Senate where it should have gone through 3. One of the legislators proposed an amendment to say, well, if we're going to have the right to fish and hunt, why don't we have the right to clean water? It got shot down. So, to say, oh, well, let's put this on the ballot. Let's put this on the ballot, give everyone the right to, go shoot wildlife or whatever. Let's put that on the ballot. But no. Let's not have a right to clean water. which you would think is a fundamental right. I mean, it should be up there with the right of free speech, right of religion, right to clean water. I mean, you would think so, but, why is it so hard? Why is it so hard to get these fundamental ideas into our laws?
I have some theories of why it's so difficult, and I would go straight to special interests, such as developers and industries and people that are polluting the water. They don't want to be held accountable, and they don't want to deal with their secret little dirty problem that they have. It's going to cost them more money to have to actually deal with the source of the issue than it is to be able to say, hey, Environmental Protection Agency, give me a permit.
Yeah.
They don't want to have to actually be responsible for it. And so it's at the cost of our wildlife, our fisheries, and our health. And they don't care. It's money that's influencing Tallahassee. And until people in Florida unite and stand up and start helping bring awareness and educating, we're really not going to be able to make that difference on a state level. It really is all about awareness. Awareness brings action.
I can't agree with you more about the state level being influenced by money because these campaigns have cost so much money to get elected to the state legislature, especially the state senate. And in order to get to a point where you have actual good representation, right? Even though you really, it's hard to do because you have gerrymandered districts and things like that. But you think, okay, we're striking out at the state level. Let's go to the municipal level, right? And that kind of leads us into this next segment about how when you turn your focus to passing something on a municipal level, let's just take a look and see what happens.
Trashed beach. This is what part of the shoreline around the Indian River Lagoon looks like. Trash is everywhere and dirty brown water as well. And to make matters worse, it stinks. The intense heat is making things worse, too.
Fox 35's Stel Bailey took these concerns to the city and shows us their plan to clean up the area.
I'm here at Scobie Park in downtown Titusville, and I want you to take a look at this shoreline. Debris, standing water, and a rotten smell is causing concern and raising questions about whether or not this water is safe to be around. It takes your breath away. The rancid smell is just one of the red flags Stel Bailey is worried about. She's an environmental health advocate with Fight for Zero who says these conditions are not normal.
We're seeing buildup of litter, garbage, algae, and vibrant colors within the water. And that's concerning for people's health because we're wondering if there's harmful bacteria.
She's gathering water samples at Scobie Park and other spots in Titusville after hearing from neighbors who are frustrated.
It smells like raw sewage many days, depending on which way the wind's blowing and how humid it is. If it's real humid, the stench is so bad you don't want to come out.
Dawn Drake still comes out to sit by the water, but steers clear of anything living in the lagoon.
There's no way I'd eat anything out of it just from the smell alone.
Fox 35 took these concerns to the Public Works Director, who says they're installing new baffle boxes to stop the pileups.
The screens will catch trash and debris of a larger size, and the filter material that's in is actually purpose-built for nitrogen and phosphorus removal.
The intense heat wave hasn't helped, and Bailey says these conditions could spread if something isn't done soon.
That it's cooking the pollution. And so, we know that we're seeing record temperatures in our water and lately here in our area. And so I think this is going to be a continued problem for the following years.
And Fight for Zero says their water test should be back within a couple of days. And the city of Titusville says they will continue to work on improvement projects to make sure the Indian River Lagoon is safe and healthy. Reporting in Titusville, Esther Bauer, Fox 35 News.
And Brevard County just got back to us about the trash. They tell us the Save Our Indian River Lagoon program has completed 76 construction projects to reduce pollution throughout the lagoon. 26 projects are currently under construction and 45 are in the design and permitting process.
Okay, Stel. So we've talked about your personal story and what really got you involved in this, and your doctor's diagnosis that this was environmentally caused. And then you went through and did the scientific research to zero in on the pockets, the hot spots. You were looking for maybe a couple dozen, and you had 800 in Brevard County. And then, we've talked about PFAS and how they enter the water through infiltration into the aquifer, and also how stormwater carries them off into the IRL lagoon. And then fish eat the algae that have ingested this PFAS, and now people have got it. And we talk about, okay, let's get the, here's a crazy idea. Let's get the Florida Department of Environmental Protection to protect the environment, right? What a concept. Mm-hmm. And we find that they don't do it, and then we say, well, okay, let's try to get the legislature to install a right to clean water into the Constitution, and they refuse to do it. And so now you turn your focus on a particular community that's got a unique problem, and that's Titusville. And pick up this story from there. What piqued your interest about Titusville?
Well, Titusville is actually an area where I have family who live there. And, what started it for me was I did a public record request back in 2019. And I said, and I did this across all 67 counties of Florida, by the way. And Titusville's response was really odd to me. I didn't have a response like this in all 67 counties, but Titusville came back and they said, that's going to be $35 an hour for us to grab this one piece of paper to tell you what this result is. And so I thought, why is it going to cost me $35 an hour for a minimum of 2 hours? That's $65 about, right? And so I started doing some in-depth research on Titusville, and there were a lot of sewage spill issues. Titusville's notorious for a couple things among the residents, and one thing is extremely high water bills. They're very aware of it, and water quality issues, but also the sewage spills. And so we started investigating and started documenting all the sewage spills. And then so that's what really drove us into the city, and we started realizing there's all these spills happening. Are they being reported? And then we got whistleblowers eventually who would tell us exactly where to go document the sewage spills. And then you fast forward and a massive 7 million gallon sewage spill happened at Sandpoint Park, which was like I think that was probably a PR nightmare for the city of Titusville. And so we really spent day in and day out just reporting on it, just relentless to show the community, do you know this is happening in your backyard? Like, everybody's talked about it, but nobody ever really documented it. Everybody's talked about it, but nobody ever did testing to prove that it was E. coli and that it was human raw sewage that was going in there. Everyone talked about it, but they didn't know how it was impacting the ecosystem in the area. And so this is just one example. This clip that you just saw is one example of one of the areas, one of the many areas that we were documenting. That's supposed to be a living shoreline. You saw those images. That's supposed to be a living shoreline. Does it look alive to you?
No, it does not. And what it looks like is the edge of a sewage treatment plant is what it looks like. And certainly what was floating in the water there looked like raw sewage. We have cases in Florida where secondarily treated wastewater gets into lakes and rivers or whatever. But we're talking about untreated, right? Untreated wastewater going straight into the Indian River Lagoon?
That's what happens when they have their breaks, yes. And that's why it smells so bad. And what they do is they use tactics and they try to confuse the communities. This isn't the only community this happens in, where they'll say, oh, it's just decaying plant. But they don't have scientific data or evidence or testing to prove what it is. And so we go out there and we do the E. coli testing. In fact, that exact area that you just saw, our test came back so high that the lab said we have to put too numerous to even count it. That's how bad it was.
That's E. coli?
Mm-hmm.
E. coli bacteria?
And then they tried to dismiss it by saying, oh, it was probably an animal, like a raccoon. That's why. There was a raccoon that probably, took a dump in the Indian River Lagoon. And that's why it looks like that.
A tribe of raccoons.
A tribe.
Maybe.
I mean, that's been an ongoing inside joke. Because they've blamed raccoons more than once.
Really?
On things, yes. They said that they took a bunch of dead sea. I can't help but laugh because it's so ridiculous. Horseshoe crabs, and piled it up in these massive piles that were dead from what we believe may have been dissolved oxygen in the water. And so we started questioning who piled all of these horseshoe crabs up, and the city said it was raccoons. So that just makes them look more ridiculous and suspicious.
Mm-hmm. Well, it sounds like the raccoons were building a pyramid or something of these horseshoe crabs, which I didn't know that was a common thing among raccoons, but apparently, according to the city of Titusville, it is. So we're zooming in on Titusville. The problem with the raw sewage that they're dumping because of a break, right? They had a break in the line and they didn't repair it. Is that what it was?
Well, there's been more than one break. So the first massive break was because somebody installed that pipe incorrectly in 1998. They never said who the contractor was, the company that installed it. They even went on the record saying they believe that there might be some liability there and that they'd like to know, but they never say who the contractor is. And there are speculation that it's somebody related to a council member at the city of Titusville. And that's just one instance of there's been dozens. I mean, especially, as you know, in Florida, after it rains, after hurricanes or tropical storms pass by, because the system gets overloaded. And so we've seen it where we've gone out and we've reported on them a sewage issue, and they'll say, you don't know what you're talking about, so we'll contact FDEP, because we have contacts up at FDEP and these different agencies. And if you're persistent, and it's sad that you have to be so persistent, and instead of them being transparent and truthful and honest and working alongside and going out there on location. Another instance is we went and there was a failure at one of the pump stations, and it was going all underneath these residents' homes and into this man's pool. And even that incident, I called up council members and I said, why don't you come out here on location? Just come out here so you can meet with the residents. Isn't that your role as a council member, as a representative of these residents? Come out here and look at what is happening, because you need to be just as frustrated and angry as they are. They told me, those residents told me they had been dealing with that over and over and over again. That wasn't a first-time situation. And so you've got these breaks throughout the whole city because of the horrendous infrastructure that they didn't keep up with, they didn't take care of, they didn't prioritize. The can got kicked down the road. And so, of course, this current council has a massive, long history, decades of issues on their hands. But I think transparency goes a long way, and I think collaboration goes a long way, and many of them claim to believe in home rule, and the way that they've treated citizens and residents working on this says otherwise.
You know, we are talking about the city of Titusville and how unresponsive they were to, number one, acknowledge that there's a problem, and number two, to fix the problem. And they'd rather point the finger at you and say, no, you're the problem. Why don't you go back to doing whatever you're doing, and we'll continue running the city the way that we're running. So the sewage continued to flow into the Indian River Lagoon. And your is seeing the effects, not just on that particular beach that we looked at in the report, but also out along the causeway, right? Was there a park along the causeway also that was affected?
Yeah, it was that. And so there's been harmful algal blooms to the point where we had to test for the harmful algae because the city has even been on the record. City council members have been on the record and have said that if we test for it and something comes back, then we have to do something about it. So they've been against the residents on even testing for anything because they don't want to know if there's sewage or harmful algae. And then they pass the buck. That's what they do. They go to the county and they're, well, we have our Save Our Indian River Lagoon, and they're supposed to be doing that. And so, yeah, it's by the causeway. We've had harmful algal blooms to the point where a child was paralyzed from the bacteria. The doctor was able to test the bacteria and link it to the sewage in the Indian River Lagoon. And he just got a settlement from the city, last year in 2024 for that case, because they actually ended up filing a lawsuit against the city for that.
Yeah, so we're talking not just about pollution for the sake of pollution. We're talking about pollution for its effects on people, as you just mentioned, with the young man, and then also the effects on wildlife. The problem with the manatees starving, and I've talked to a biologist professor at UCF, and he's still not convinced that this was a seagrass problem. He's thinking this may have had some other problem. And you're talking about the E. coli. Well, the effect of E. coli on humans can also cause a similar kind of thing where you have, a loss of bodily fluids and could it be possible? I know the common theory is that the sewage blocked the light getting to the seagrass, and because the seagrass started dying off, and then these manatees started starving because of the lack of the seagrass. But is it possible that the E. coli could have affected the manatee also?
Oh, I think it's possible that the E. coli and any other contamination from the surrounding industries, the DOD, could have impacted them because there have been studies by scientists that have tested the manatees, the alligators, the dolphins, even the dolphins having tumors. You can look at the historical information and scientific evidence that shows that even the dolphins have shown tumors. So it's very possible that these contaminants have impacted the wildlife that live. I mean, it seems like common sense, right, to think that they're impacting the wildlife in the Indian River Lagoon.
And we started having this die-off of the manatee, what was it, a couple years ago?
It was right after that massive sewage spill. It was literally, the sewage spill happened in December, late December 2020. Then January 2021, they were still working on it. And then, boom, the manatees started going. Mm-hmm. And that actually was a really interesting situation because they tried to cover that up. They didn't want people knowing that there was a mass die-off of the manatees. We just happened to uncover it because we were covering the sewage spill, and then they started just washing up on shores. And we were like, what is going on? And we initially thought it could have been from the sewage because dissolved oxygen will do that to fish. It will do a mass die-off of fish. So we were like, there's a problem here. So we started calling Florida Fish and Wildlife going, we're getting all these manatees that are washing up. And, eventually there was an island where they were stacking the bodies, and they call it Manatee Graveyard. That's what we call it now, because you go out to that island and it was just nothing but manatee bones piled up high and out in the middle of the Indian River Lagoon. You don't even imagine stuff like this is even happening in your own backyard, but it was.
So, we're not saying it was a cover-up, but it certainly had the effect. If you're piling them up in the middle of an island in the middle of the lagoon, it's not as though you're piling them up. It's someplace where people are going to walk by and go, my God, why do we have so many manatees dying all of a sudden? And you talked to people who were clean water advocates in Titusville, and tell us kind of where that went.
I talked to them about the manatees, and we created this whole situation where we started just reporting the manatees, like helping the agency out, Florida Fish and Wildlife, and documenting them and photographing, videoing, going live, bringing mass awareness to it. It gained national media attention, but at the same time, I didn't realize that it made us into targets by the agency itself. Why? I don't know, but I pulled my David file, which is your driver information data. It's from a database that, the police and certain agencies can look you up. And FWC had numerous people look me up, and they put that I was under criminal investigation. Well, there's nothing that I ever did that would have prompted a criminal investigation. And so it's just little things like that that makes you wonder, why is this agency more worried about me and not worried about the fact that you've got hundreds of manatees that are perishing in this water body, and not, it's just interesting to see how they spend a lot more time going after activists and advocates. And we've seen this as a pattern and a trend, especially in the city of Titusville. It's really unfolded, especially in the last few years and through this past election. Anyone who spoke up and said that they're interested in getting a right to clean water and wanting to have the conversation even, and again, all of those citizens did go to the city council. It was the city council's responsibility to amend that ballot language and make sure that it was correct, and for the voters to vote on and to educate the voters. But it's been a trend that they end up targeted. They end up getting a lot of, and it's usually people affiliated with certain officials and city politicians that will go online, and they will basically try to make your life a living hell. They will try to discredit you. They will do character assassination. They do all of these tactics, and you've got to have your head on straight and be very focused in what your goals are and what you want to accomplish, because if you don't, that can be an easy distraction.
One Brevard County commissioner came up with a solution, and let's hear what his solution was.
Many manatees are dying and getting towed here at the edge of the pier in Titusville. A local commissioner thinks his controversial idea could help solve that.
If you killed a manatee, my God, the world would come to an end. But I think something has to be considered along those lines.
It's a proposal that left many locals speechless.
If you have a population of 1,000 manatees and the environment will only support 500, it makes sense that they're going to eat themselves out of house and home.
Brevard County Commissioner Kurt Smith came up with it last week, suggesting hunting sea cows like states do with their overrun bear and deer populations.
It's just absolutely disgusting.
Over 1,000 manatees starved to death last year from a lack of seagrass, a big part of that due to pollution. Environmentalist and Brevard native Stel Bailey calling Smith's idea ridiculous, saying it misses the point.
They're not addressing the source of pollution. They're just distracting from the real root causes of what is occurring here, which is pollution in the Indian River Lagoon.
The FWC says manatees are protected under the Marine Mammal Protection Act, and the killing or hunting of these animals is not allowed.
It was really, really disheartening to see when we could be focusing on clean water.
We reached out to Smith for a comment. He says he doesn't want to be cruel, but says people are getting too emotional over his wake-up call. For now in Titusville, Alina Shirazi, Fox 35 News.
All right. Well, that's one way to look at it, right, Stel? Why not apply that same solution to the panthers? We get them; they're being hit by cars, So if you shoot half of them, the roadkills are going to go down by half,
Mm-hmm.
right? That makes sense.
Yeah. Sounds
You know,
logical.
And manatees are a protected species, right? Under the Endangered Species Act. Are they threatened, I think, or?
No, I think they actually were off the list, and I'm not. I don't think they ever got back on it, but they were at one point on that list.
Yeah. So, here's this. I think over here, at least where we are in Orange County, where we have good commissioners and reasonable people, it's difficult for us to watch something like this guy, and he's on the county commission, or was on the county commission in Brevard, make such a ridiculous proposal with a straight face, right? He wasn't joking, right?
I don't think he was. I think he was pandering to a certain viewership in that moment. I don't think he was thinking. I mean, he would have been better off saying, we need to make sure we study these manatees. I mean, we had a perfect opportunity to be testing these, to figure out what kind of chemicals that were in these manatees. They were already doing it, taking it to the landfill. And so I wasn't happy with all the things that they were testing it for. It was just like a small list of chemicals and things like that. But what he suggested, it just felt like, I don't know why they do this and why they don't think these things through, but to be like, let's just eat them and make a joke of it when there's just no empathy there. You know what I mean? And it's frustrating when somebody like myself was at those boat ramps day in and day out, and it wasn't just me, other advocates were there, even citizens watching them crank these things into their trailers. I mean, that is an image that doesn't escape you, watching these manatees get cranked in, and not just one, but sometimes 3 at a time. And then they would go all the way to the landfill and take them to the landfill. And there's images of drone images of, over them as they're performing, their samples, they're dissecting it at the landfill next to all the trash. So is that what you think of our manatees, our precious manatees that bring tourists and the very thing that people value and come here to see? I can tell you, I have family out of town that will come in and say, where can we go look for manatees? So is that what you think of them, is by taking them next to in the landfill as trash?
Yeah, it's really a sacrilege, but unfortunately, it's become commonplace in this state. And one of the reasons why we're doing this podcast is there's a lot of information that gets out there from the commercial side, the tourism side, et cetera. And problems like what we've been talking about today are kind of swept under the carpet. And worse than sweeping them under the carpet, in the category of no good deed goes unpunished, you were talking before we went to this story about you're able to pull now records of who's pulling your driver's record, right? Mm-hmm. And it turns out while you were doing these samples, they were investigating you for, was it a crime? What were they saying?
Oh, the reasoning they put in the record is just criminal investigation. And so right now I can't talk more in depth about it because I'm taking action on it. But it's in my opinion that people abuse that system, which is actually a federal crime to do. And they do it as a way to learn more about you. There's a lot of information in that database about you. Even if you have a medical condition, it'll be in there if you put it, like if you have vision issues or anything. And so I think some people will abuse the system to learn more about you, to look you up and say, who is this person? Where do they live? Do they have a criminal background? Because those are types of things that they will look for to try to go on social media and discredit you. And to do the things that I was talking about before you played the clip, it's just an avenue that they take. The first thing they do is they look for backgrounds. They look for anything, any kind of dirt they can get on you. And I've never even had as much as a speeding ticket, So I think it drives them crazy. I am like the good. I won't even do a crosswalk. I won't jaywalk. So it's hilarious to me that I get these records back and it shows all these criminal investigations next to my name. But it's also very alarming. And I think it goes back to, when we talk about the right to clean water, our rights are being eroded in this country and in this state. And I know that a lot of people don't deal directly with the government and policies and this type of work and advocacy, and unfortunately, somehow it became my calling. But I think that should concern a lot more people, that our rights are slowly, little by little, being chipped away. And if we don't stand up now and we don't start telling the government, you represent us, you serve us, and we're not going to take this, before you know it, it's going to be too late. And that's my worry, because I'm seeing it already unfold through the work that I do with the preemptions at a state level and them not allowing, home rule to take place in cities, and with them violating my rights. I mean, sending police to my home to intimidate me and violate my Fourth Amendment. And this has been occurring in the last few years since I've really taken off and having a big following. I have a major network that I share out to all of these stories, and I'm essentially reporting. I'm an investigative reporter out in the field, reporting on real life things that are happening and sharing it with my community. And I'm getting the retaliation for doing the research and sharing the research.
I'd like to clear something up, Stel, and that is you've taken this on yourself individually, right? You don't work for any large environmental organization, right? They're not paying you to say this. They're not paying you to go take these samples. You're doing it on your own initiative. And this is not your business. You're not reaping lots of cash coming in the door because, oh my goodness, I love Stel Bailey and I want to help her, right? And let's write her a check for $1,000, which if anybody's out there watching and they want to write Stel a check for $1,000, I'm sure she would take it. But, and on the other side, okay, so you're sacrificing time that you could be making money doing other things. You have your own business. Mm-hmm. You run that business, and then you run this side. You as I like to say, you make your money in column A, and then you spend it over here in column B. And then after you do that, you encounter all these governmental obstacles by governmental agencies, governmental figures, local figures, state figures, come after you, discredit you, try to discredit you. I'll put it that way. What keeps you going? I mean, you almost seem to be as though you have a nuclear reactor inside of you that keeps you going forward. What is it that keeps you moving forward?
I always go back to my why, and I think about my father in that hospital bed, seizing up and looking at me, unable to talk to me because he was on life support, but he was very aware, and he looked at me, and the only way he could speak to me was by blinking his eyes and crying. And I go back to my why, and I know that my calling in life has changed for the rest of my life, and I don't understand it always. I will be the first person to say, I just follow the path I know I'm supposed to be on, and I know this is my calling. And I am so beyond passionate, and every time I start doubting it, I start questioning it, I'm like, I am persistent. I am that redhead, ginger snap girl that is persistent. And I go back to that why. I think about my brother. It always is at the core of me is my family. And that has always been my driving force. And then, of course, my community and ensuring that their families don't have to experience this. And so I've expanded, obviously, beyond PFAS and into all these other realms, but it's because I'm following something that it's just unexplainable. I wish I could explain it more, but it's something that I just know has to be done, and I can't stop. I'm too far into it, and I will never stop. They can keep coming for me. They can keep sending the police after me. They can keep trying to give me fake charges. I'm not going to stop. So you can either work with me or you can, I'll put a light on you. I'll shine the flashlight on you, and I'll make sure you scurry out of your shadows. And I'll make sure that everyone knows what you're doing, if you're doing anything wrong.
Yeah, and I certainly wouldn't want you coming after me, but I don't have the power of the state, and these people who are in these positions of authority, I would say without a doubt it's an abuse of power to try to, stop you, and then if you don't stop, then silence you, and if you can't be silenced, to discredit you. And yet you keep going. So that's why I was...
Yeah, because it's not, the driving force isn't money. It's not money. It's so much more than that. And I think people don't understand that. In fact, the same government entities that come after me always go to money. And I'm like, that tells you what's important to you. It's money for you. That you have to sit there and say, well, this girl's making all this money. They're trying to convince the community not to like me when they're doing this stuff. And so the community, it's up to them. I don't care who likes me or who doesn't like me. I'm not doing this to be liked. I'm doing this to do what's right. And that's what it is at the end of the day. It's not about who is right. It's about doing what's right.
Well, still, I would say you're not liked. You're loved by a lot of people. And if somebody wanted to get in contact with you, if they wanted to find out more about what you've been doing, if they want to help you do what you're doing, how would they get in touch with you?
Well, there's a couple ways. We have our nonprofit website. And by the way, nobody on our board takes a salary. Nobody. I was very clear from the very beginning when I opened it. It was going to be a resource for our community. We were going to make care packages for cancer patients. We were going to do the testing and studies and open it up for academic stuff. So fightforzero.org. And you can always message me on social media. I'm on basically every platform you can think of. And then I have my email, stelbailey@gmail.com, if they want to contact me.
Okay, Stel. Well, I'm in awe of you. And I'm sure anybody who's watched this for the full hour is in awe of you. And, you could only hope that at some point the governmental officials, if they're not brought to justice, which I'm sure you're going to do, that at least they change their ways and say, hey, the way to solve this problem is not to try to cover it up. It's to do as you do. Go to the source of the problem. Look for the cause of it, and let's all work together on trying to solve this problem and treat it like a math problem instead of a personality problem, which I think it's turned into. Well, this has been just such a great hour with you, Stel, and I thank you so much for being here. And this broadcast will be able to be accessed online. We have a YouTube channel now, so you can watch it on Facebook, you can watch it on YouTube channel. And next week, a little plug for next week, we're going to have Mike Myjack from Speak Up Titusville, who's going to talk about their local effort within the city of Titusville to try and get a right to clean water on the ballot. And what happened from that point forward, it's almost unbelievable unless you just listen to your story, the obstacles that they have gone through. So for that, I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in, and we'll be back next week at 6 p.m. on Florida Wildlife Advocates. Thanks for watching.